Hey folks, and welcome to another edition of Zog Science. Today we're going to be finishing up our look at the nervous system with how animals respond. So, animals are in general going to be responding by moving. We have muscles that have evolved to facilitate motion. These are another one of those things like nervous cells that are unique to animals. There are three different types of muscles. You've got skeletal muscles, which are involved with voluntary motion. So those are your big muscle groups, things that we use when we play sports or when we ride or things like that. You've got smooth muscles, which line your organs and are involved in involuntary motions. And then you've got cardiac muscles, which make up your heart. Those are independent of the other two and are also involuntary. Your cardiac muscles are similar structurally to the skeletal muscles, while still having involuntary motions. We are going to focus on skeletal muscles and not so much on the smooth and the cardiac. Excuse me. So muscles either contract or relax. Those are the only two things that they do, and they only do that in one kind of direction. And when we take a look at skeletal muscles are broken up into units called sarcomeres, and the sarcomeres have these delineations. You don't really need to worry about that so much. The thing you need to worry about is the myosin and then the actin. So the myosin, those are the thick filaments, and then the actin are the thin filaments. Now, the large muscles are broken up into antagonistic pairs. You have the flexor and then the extensor. So when we take a look at our biceps, the flexor is the bicep, and then the extensor is the tricep. And all of your major muscles come in those groups, and that's so that you can move things in two directions. All right, so muscles are made up of bundles of muscle fibers, and those fibers are made up of multinucleated cells. So each cell has many nuclei inside it. Those cells are then made up of myofibrils, and the myofibrils are made up of the actin and the myosin. Remember, the thick filaments are the myosin, and the thin filaments are the actin. Again, those are arranged into the sarcomeres. So here is how that actually is going to work and produce motion. What happens is that ATP is going to bind to the myosin, changing it from a low energy configuration into a high energy configuration. So the ATP gets broken down into the ADP and the phosphorus, and that changes it into a high energy configuration. The myosin head is then going to bind to the actin at a binding site. And after it does that, it is then going to be pulled. When it pulls, it is going to pull the actin towards the center of the sarcomere, which is going to contract. And then an ATP is added on. When it is added on, it changes into the low energy conformation, which is then going to release the filament, and the filament is going to then relax. And that cycle repeats itself over and over again. Now, these myosin binding sites are generally blocked on the actin so that the myosin head cannot attach. However, calcium is going to be released into the sarcomere so that it can bind at the troponin complex, and that's going to expose the myosin and allow it, or expose the myosin binding sites on the actin. And this is another great example of why calcium is so important. If you don't have enough calcium, then your muscles cannot function properly because you're going to be unable to to allow the binding sites to become available. And the way that the way that the calcium is stimulated to be released is through nerve impulses. So this is how we have nerve control of the of your muscles. And these occur at the neuromuscular junction. So you have your nerve that is going to attach at a synapse, and that when you get a nerve impulse that comes along there and it gets to the synapse, is going to release acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter, and it is a specific neurotransmitter that is only found in your skeletal muscles. And so when that acetylcholine gets released along the synapse, it is going to trigger a response that is going to lead to calcium being released from the SR, which is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It's going to release that calcium into the muscle unit itself, into the sarcomere, which is going to then allow the muscle contraction to occur. After the muscle contraction has occurred, you have a calcium pump that is then going to pump all the calcium back out, so that way your muscle just doesn't continuously keep on firing, which would obviously not be a great thing. Now, the way that the muscle gets activated is if we have enough of an action potential that causes the entire motor unit to, that causes all of the motor units to become activated. We call this tetanus. So when your whole muscle is actually activated, that is known as a tetanus. Now you may be thinking, I have gotten tetanus shots in the past. What's the correlation? Well, tetanus is a disease that is caused by a bacteria, and the bacteria releases a toxin that gets into your brain, and when it gets into your brain, it actually stops the inhibitory nerve impulses that shut down muscle function. So you have an impulse that initiates your muscle, and then you have an impulse that tells your muscle to relax. That shuts down the inhibitory nervous signal, and therefore your muscles will contract, and they stay contracted for longer than they should. It can do things like lockjaw, so you can't actually open your mouth because your jaw is constantly wired shut, and it's caused by a bacteria. If you've ever heard of stonefish like to hang out on the bottom of the ocean. If you step on them, they have a poison that can cause tetanus to occur in legs and can be fatal if it gets into your heart, right? It locks your heart up, and your heart does not continue pumping. So definitely a problem. Now, muscles would not be able to function properly without the skeleton because they need something to be able to attach to use as a pivot point to pull on, right? The muscles are, they work by contracting and pulling. Well, if they don't contract and pull on anything, then they're not going to be able to do their job. So your skeletal muscles need the skeleton in order to attach to then pull. Now, an interesting point here is that skeletons, especially our skeleton, is not a static structure. Rather, it is constantly being broken down, being built up over time, right? So the calcium that you ingested when you were a child, you've probably released that calcium to do any number of functions that we've been talking about, and you've since replaced it with other calcium. So that's, I think we tend to think of bone as being static because, we tend to think of skeletons and things like that, when the reality is that bone is actually much more fluid of a structure. You've got different types of joints. Those joints allow different types of motions. So you got the ball and socket joint, which allows, pretty much 180 degrees of motion around. Obviously, different people have different amounts of motion. You've got hinge joints, such as your elbow, where you can go in one direction. And then you also have radial joints or pivotal joints where you can actually rotate around in various directions. So important that we have all of those things in order to be able to actually move. Now, there are not only just endoskeletons, which are internal ones like we have. One of the benefits to having an endoskeleton is that it is able to grow with the organism, so it's always the right size. The problem is that you've got your soft, fragile tissue on the outside, so we don't have a lot of protection from sharp, pointy things coming in and getting us. And again, these are found in vertebrates. We can also have exoskeletons, which are external, so therefore it's protecting of the soft tissue. However, it is going to not be able to grow with the organism as much. It might grow a little bit, but not too much. And so that's why it has to be shed over time, which is called molting. This is found in arthropods and mollusks. I've got a quick video that shows how kind of this process in a time lapse. It's pretty cool, I think. So you can see here that the crab is coming out of its shell. This is the shell right here, and it is currently molting, pulling itself up out of the old shell, which was too small or getting too small, and it will then create a new exoskeleton over time. So there he is. He's pulled himself out. You can see the color difference right now. Right now, he's very vulnerable because he doesn't have a shell, and this is a time in all these creatures that do molting's lives where they're pretty susceptible to predators. So cool stuff there. Yep. Sorry, a little far. There we are. All right. We can also have a hydrostatic skeleton, which is where you have pressure from the inside. So the different body parts is actually putting pressure on the outer walls, and that is going to maintain structure. This is generally found in annelids. This is great for annelids because they live in dirt, right? So they want to be able to adjust to their environment. They don't want to have necessarily a rigid structure. So it's a good thing that they don't have bones and squeeze into fairly tight spaces. Now, when we talk about locomotion, we talk about movement. There are three types of movement that animals have. We've got running, flying, and swimming. I think one of the more interesting points is kind of the various energy efficiencies for these different types of locomotion. Swimming and running are more efficient than flying, but I think what's most interesting, and it's kind of hard to see just because of the slight problem. Let me see if I can swap this back out here real quick. There we go. Is that as you notice that as body size increases, if energy efficiency increases. I think that's pretty interesting and kind of goes along with what we've been talking about in terms of metabolic rates, right? Larger organisms tend to be more efficient. All right, so this is kind of, a summation of all the things we've been talking about in terms of the nervous system and all that kind of stuff. You've got sensation, so you have some sort of input. You then integrate that system using the central nervous system, and then you respond. Usually animals are going to respond with some sort of movement. So thanks for watching. Next time we'll be dealing with reproduction, and I'll see you then.